At some point, almost everyone has the same thought. I missed my chance. You see someone who bought a house 10 years ago, someone who invested before the market took off, someone who started a business while you were still trying to figure life out. And quietly, a story begins to form. If only I had started earlier. It feels convincing, because when you look around, it seems like all the biggest opportunities belong to the past. The cheapest homes, the fastest growing companies, the life-changing investments. You start believing wealth is something that happens to people who arrived before you did. But what if that belief is the real thing holding you back? Because history tells a very different story. Every generation believes the best opportunities are already gone. Yet every generation creates new millionaires. This isn't a story about getting rich overnight. It's about understanding why feeling late can become the most expensive financial mistake you'll ever make. Think about the last time you said, I should have invested back then. Maybe you were thinking about Bitcoin. Maybe it was the stock market, real estate, a business idea, or a career you never pursued. The moment passes, and almost immediately, your mind rewrites history. It convinces you that the outcome was obvious, that if you had simply started earlier, everything would be different today. But history never feels uncertain when you're looking backward. It only feels uncertain while you're living through it. Go back 10 years. People weren't standing in line to buy every winning investment. They were worried. Markets were volatile. Businesses were failing. Experts disagreed with one another. Nothing looked guaranteed. That's the part our memories conveniently forget. We remember the winners. We forget the uncertainty they had to live through. That's why every generation believes they arrived too late. People in the 1990s thought they had missed the biggest opportunities. People in the 2000s believed the same thing. Then, the 2010s arrived. Now people say they missed those years too. The timeline keeps moving, but the feeling never changes. Because the problem isn't the calendar, it's perspective. When you convince yourself that all the great opportunities belong to the past, something dangerous happens. You stop looking for the ones that exist today. You become an observer instead of a participant. You spend more time regretting yesterday than preparing for tomorrow. And while you're busy mourning opportunities that no longer exist, new ones are quietly taking shape. The strange part is that most of them don't look extraordinary in the beginning. Neither did the last generation's opportunities. They only became obvious after time had done the hard work, which raises a much better question. Instead of asking, why didn't I start earlier? Ask yourself, what opportunity am I overlooking today that will seem obvious 10 years from now? Because that question doesn't keep you trapped in the past. It forces you to pay attention to the future. And that's where every great financial story actually begins. Here's something that rarely makes headlines. Many wealthy people didn't become wealthy in their 20s. Some didn't even start until their 40s or their 50s. Not because they lacked ambition, because life happened first. They paid bills, raised families, changed careers, made mistakes, started over, sometimes more than once. We tend to celebrate success. We rarely study the years that came before it, the years filled with uncertainty, the years where nothing looked extraordinary. That's why late success often feels sudden. It isn't. It's simply the first chapter that everyone else notices. Think about any tree that's been standing for decades. The day it finally towers above everything around it, nobody talks about the years when it barely reached above the grass. Growth was happening then, too. It just wasn't visible. Financial progress works much the same way. Someone can spend years learning valuable skills, building relationships, understanding markets, saving small amounts, recovering from failures. Then one opportunity appears. From the outside, it looks like luck. From the inside, it looks like preparation finally meeting the right moment. That's why believing you're too late is so dangerous. It convinces you that time only works against you, but time works in two directions. Yes, you can't recover the years you've already lost, but you can still multiply the years you have left. The question isn't whether you started at 20 or 30 or 40. The question is whether you'll still be saying it's too late 5 years from now, because 5 years will pass either way. The only difference is what you'll have built by the time they do. The people who eventually create wealth don't spend forever wishing they had started sooner. At some point, they stop looking backward. They accept where they are. They begin with what they have, and they allow consistency to accomplish what regret never could. That's the moment the timeline changes. Not when they become rich. When they finally decide the past no longer gets to make decisions for their future. The biggest price of believing you're too late isn't financial, it's psychological. Because once your mind accepts that the best years are behind you, waiting starts to feel reasonable. You tell yourself you'll begin after the next raise, after the next promotion, after you save a little more, after life finally slows down. The problem is, life almost never slows down. There is always another expense, another responsibility, another reason to postpone the decision. That's how years quietly disappear. Not through one dramatic mistake, through hundreds of ordinary delays. Think about someone who spends 5 years waiting for the perfect time to invest. During those same 5 years, someone else invests small amounts consistently. Neither person knows exactly what the market will do. Neither has perfect timing, but only one allows time to start working. That's the difference. Most people overestimate timing. They underestimate consistency. History is full of people who spent years trying to predict the perfect moment. Meanwhile, disciplined investors quietly kept showing up, month after month, year after year. Not because they knew the future, because they understood something more important. Progress belongs to the people who participate, not the people who wait for certainty. The same principle applies far beyond investing. You don't become healthier by reading about exercise. You become healthier by moving. You don't build a successful career by waiting until you feel completely qualified. You build it by improving one skill at a time. Money works the same way. Every month you spend preparing without taking action, you become more informed. But you don't become more experienced. Experience only comes from participation. That's why the most successful people aren't always the ones who started first. They're often the ones who stopped waiting first. Because while everyone else was searching for the perfect opportunity, they quietly began creating momentum. And once momentum begins, it has a remarkable way of making yesterday matter less and tomorrow matter more. There's another reason people believe it's too late. They imagine that successful people started with perfect timing, the perfect idea, the perfect economy, the perfect opportunity. Reality is usually far less impressive. Most successful journeys begin in uncertainty. Businesses are started during recessions. Investments are made when headlines predict disaster. Careers change long after people believe they're supposed to have everything figured out. At the time, none of those decisions feel obvious. They're uncomfortable. That's what makes them valuable. Look back at almost any major financial success. You'll usually find moments that could have convinced someone to quit. Markets crashed, projects failed, jobs disappeared, plans changed. The people who eventually succeeded weren't protected from uncertainty. They simply refused to let uncertainty make every decision for them. That's an important distinction because waiting for perfect conditions sounds responsible. But perfection has a habit of never arriving. There will always be another election, another recession, another market correction, another prediction that the best days are over. If you build your future around waiting for certainty, you'll spend your life standing still. The people who quietly build wealth think differently. They don't ask whether conditions are perfect. They ask whether the decision still makes sense over the long term. That question changes everything. It shifts your attention away from today's headlines and toward the next 10 or 20 years. That's where lasting wealth is usually created. Not through one brilliant decision, but through ordinary decisions made consistently despite uncertainty. Because the perfect start doesn't exist, only the next step does. And for most people, that next step matters far more than the one they never took years ago. When people hear the word compounding, they almost always think about money, a retirement account, an investment portfolio, interest earning more interest. That's only part of the story. Compounding begins long before your bank account notices it. It starts with your decisions. Every book you read teaches you something the previous book couldn't. Every skill you develop makes the next skill easier to learn. Every meaningful connection introduces opportunities that didn't exist yesterday. Confidence compounds too. The first conversation feels uncomfortable. The 100th feels natural. The same is true for discipline. Saving your first $100 feels difficult. Saving the next 100 feels familiar. Eventually, the habit becomes part of who you are. That's why saying, "I'm too late," is so dangerous. It tricks you into believing the only thing that compounds is time. But habits compound. Knowledge compounds. Experience compounds. Reputation compounds. Even small improvements compound. Imagine two people starting today. Neither has much money. Neither has the perfect job. Neither knows exactly what the future will look like. One spends the next 5 years wishing they had started earlier. The other spends those same 5 years becoming slightly better every month, learning, saving, investing, improving. 5 years later, one has a longer list of regrets, the other has momentum, and momentum is one of the most valuable assets you can own. Because once progress becomes part of your routine, you stop relying on motivation. You stop waiting for the perfect moment. You simply keep moving. That's when something remarkable happens. You stop asking whether you're too late to become wealthy. You become too busy building wealth to keep asking the question. The calendar hasn't changed, but your direction has. And in the long run, direction almost always matters more than where you started. There comes a point when every financial journey asks the same question. Not, did you start early? But, what did you do once you realized you needed to start? That's the moment that separates regret from progress. Because everyone has reasons for starting late. Some were paying off debt. Some were supporting their families. Some were simply trying to survive. Life doesn't begin from the same starting line for everyone. And it was never supposed to. The mistake is believing your past has the authority to decide your future. It doesn't. Every day you continue believing it's too late, you're quietly turning one lost year into two. Then 2 become 5. Then 5 become 10. The irony is hard to ignore. The fear of being late often becomes the very reason people fall further behind. Not because they lacked opportunity, because they refused to move. At some point, you have to stop negotiating with yesterday. Yesterday has already made its decision. Tomorrow hasn't. That's where your attention belongs. Build the habit. Learn the skill. Save the first dollar. Make the first investment you understand. Apply for the opportunity you think is beyond your reach. Not because success is guaranteed, because standing still guarantees nothing changes. Years from now, you'll probably wish you had started today. Just as today, you wish you had started years ago. That pattern only ends when you decide this moment is no longer too early to prepare, and no longer too late to begin. Because wealth is rarely built by people who had perfect timing. It's built by people who finally stopped using time as an excuse and started using it as an advantage. Imagine yourself 10 years from now. You open an old photo. Maybe it's from today. You remember exactly how you felt. You thought you were behind. You thought the best opportunities had already passed. You thought everyone else had figured out something you hadn't. Now imagine looking back with a different perspective. Would your future self really care that you didn't start at 20? Or would they care that you finally started at all? That's the question that matters. Because 10 years from now, today's problems will seem much smaller than they do right now. The money you haven't earned yet can still be earned. The skills you don't have yet can still be learned. The investments you haven't made yet can still be made. What becomes impossible to recover is another decade spent believing your story was already over. The truth is, financial success has never belonged exclusively to early starters. It belongs to consistent starters, to people who keep learning when progress feels slow, who keep investing when results are invisible, who keep improving when nobody is applauding. Those are the people who eventually look lucky. But luck rarely tells the whole story. Behind almost every overnight success are years of ordinary decisions, quiet mornings, careful spending, patient investing, new skills, small improvements, repeated so many times that they eventually become impossible to ignore. If you think it's too late to get rich, maybe you're asking the wrong question. Instead of asking whether you missed yesterday's opportunity, ask whether you're willing to miss today's. Because years from now, someone else will look at the opportunities that exist today and say, I wish I had started back then. Don't let that person be you. The best time to build your future may not have been years ago, but the next best time is still waiting, and it's called today. If this video changed the way you think about time, don't let it become another lesson you forget by tomorrow. Take one step today. Not next week, not next month, today. Open an investment account, start an emergency fund, learn one new skill, read one chapter, pay off one small debt. It doesn't matter how small the first step is. What matters is that you stop giving yesterday the power to decide tomorrow. Because the people who eventually build wealth don't have the ability to travel back in time. Neither do you. They simply reach a moment where they stop asking, what if I had started earlier? And start asking, what can I build from this point forward? That's the moment everything begins to change. Years from now, your future self won't remember the day you regretted starting late. They'll remember the day you finally stopped waiting. If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe for more cinematic finance stories about money, business, psychology, and the hidden systems that shape financial success. Remember, the greatest financial opportunity isn't the one you missed. It's the one you decide not to miss today.